104% tariffs on China are not enough. I'm advocating 400%. I do business in China. They don't play by the rules. They've been in the WTO for decades. They have never abided by any of the rules they agreed to when they came in for decades. They cheat, they steal IP. I can't litigate in their courts. They take product, technology, they steal it, they manufacture it and sell it back here. Never has an administration.
400% tariffs? What would that look like?
I want Xi on an airplane to Washington to level the playing field. This is not about tariffs anymore. Nobody has taken on China yet, not the Europeans, no administration for decades. As someone who actually does business there, I've had enough. I speak for millions of Americans who have IP that have been stolen by the Chinese. I have nothing against the Chinese people. They brought great literacy, art, and tech to the world. The government cheats and steals, and finally, an administration, you may not like Trump, you may not like his style or his rhetoric, finally, an administration that puts up and says enough. 400% tariffs tomorrow morning. He'll tell you why. Xi can only stay the supreme leader if people are employed. If we wipe out any business there, because we are still 39% of all consumables on Earth and 25% of the world's GDP, America is the #1 economy on Earth with all the cards. We will not have that forever. It's time to squeeze Chinese heads into the wall now.
Well, hold on a second,
tariffs.
Kevin. Well, I hear you, but hold on. If we're talking about people, the average consumer, not necessarily the head honchos of businesses all across the globe, can they withstand the pressure of that sort of tax on the goods?
It's short-lived. There will be
but what's your timeline compared to, you don't know the average American's timeline, what they can actually survive. There's people right now who can't survive
400% tomorrow morning, cheese on an airplane to Washington to cut a deal.
Boy. So we have to continue our coverage of this escalating trade war between the United States and China, because that is what it's really about. Okay, the other countries are coming to the table, except the EU. They just announced retaliatory tariffs on the United States of America. I really don't like that. Again, I've already talked about how much I think that the EU is in over their heads, right, in regards to how they're trying to deal with President Trump. And President Trump needs to put the EU in their place. But regardless, that's not what this video is about, right? This video is about the fact that China is now imposing a 84% tariff on U.S. goods in response to President Trump slapping on an additional 50% tariff that now has our tariffs against China up over 100%. And yeah, it is escalating. Take a look.
In the last few moments, China has announced that they are, in return, going to bring in Chinese tariffs on US goods at the rate of 84%, and that will come into effect from April the 10th. That has come in just the last few moments. It's come from the Chinese Finance Ministry. They've told the World Trade Organization that the US's decision to impose reciprocal tariffs on Beijing threatens to further destabilize global trade. They say the situation has dangerously escalated. As one of the affected members, China expresses grave concerns and firm opposition to this reckless move, but they have, in return, announced that they are then therefore going to increase their tariffs on America. Let's talk to our business presenter, Darren McCaffrey. So I would say a tit-for-tat trade war, but, you know, 84% versus 124%. It's not tit and it's not tat, is it?
No, but it is a proper full-blown trade war, and it is a sign that China is not prepared to cede any ground on all of this. I mean, ultimately, they have taken quite a bullish decision on this. They have suggested that they are willing to take the United States on when it comes to this trade war, and this is a further sign of what we are seeing here with those extra tariffs of 84% on US goods. All I would say is it is what people have warned about, is that when you start a trade war, when both sides decide to take an entrenched position, trying to roll back from that becomes incredibly difficult, Jane. And that is what we're seeing here with China, who, unlike other countries, it must be said, most notably Britain, and to a lesser degree the European Union, who've been far more conciliatory towards the United States, and other large economies who've suggested that they do want to talk to Donald Trump to get rid of these tariffs, China has taken a very, very different approach. Now, they are both each other's biggest trading partners, so this does matter to the United States. Of course, China is the world's second largest economy. From China's point of view, what they will suggest is that of their GDP, actually the United States trade with the US only makes up 2% of their overall GDP. And to that degree, if you like, China says that they can deal with this, with these tariffs, with this trade war. But as I say, they have decided that they are not going to back down. And it'll be interesting to see what the reaction, of course, from the White House will be to this. But you can see a situation where essentially this spirals slightly out of control.
Yeah, so you've seen that, you heard that. It seems as if from an economic perspective, we may be headed towards Thucydides' trap, okay, which would be for the U.S. to gang up against China economically, because China militarily, okay, and economically, they're getting a little bit too big, right? And it's getting uncomfortable, right? In regards to how the U.S. is the biggest consumer in the world and China is the biggest producer in the world. And naturally, that's going to cause some butting of heads, right? So this is why the Trump administration is trying to reorganize global trade so that China consumes a little bit more and the U.S. produces a little bit more so that we get more balance. Because right now we are way too dependent on each other for it to be comfortable, right? When you talk about the U.S., a lot of people say that we are a declining superpower, China a rising superpower. Yeah, we got to do something about what is currently happening right now, okay? And I think that is where President Trump is coming from. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is on Fox Business, and he's going to respond to China imposing the 84% tariffs on U.S. goods.
Welcome back. Breaking this morning, China says it will impose an 84% tariff on U.S. goods, another retaliation move in response to President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. Those tariffs took effect last night at midnight, including the 104% tariff on China. Joining me now is U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Morning, Maria.
Well, I want to start right there. Give us your reaction to more escalation coming out of China, taking their tariffs up to 84% on top of President Trump's retaliatory tariffs.
Well, Maria, I think it's unfortunate that the Chinese actually don't want to come and negotiate, because they are the worst offenders in the international trading system. They have the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world. And I can tell you that this escalation is a loser for them, that they have some very smart, the economists, the academicians, technocrats within their bureaucracy, and they would be telling the leadership that we do not have the edge here. They are the surplus country, that their exports to the U.S. are 5 times our exports to China. So they can raise their tariffs, but so what?
So let's talk about this for a second, because I wonder, I agree with you. I mean, I think that China needs the United States so much more than the U.S. needs China. But the economies are so connected, Secretary. We're buying all this cheap stuff. People expect things to be cheap. And we know it's because they're made in China. And it feels like a soft war right now with China. Are there any areas or opportunities to give companies the time to move those supply chains to America so that we don't have to rely so much on China? This can't happen overnight, right? Even though China is the enemy, the #1 adversary, and we are in this soft war and they're escalating this right now, are the near-term effects such that the U.S. gets impacted negatively first?
Well, again, Maria, no one wins in a war, but it's proportionality, and the proportionality for the Chinese is going to be much worse. And the other thing too is, Maria, what would be a very good step with the Chinese would be acknowledging that the precursor chemicals for fentanyl come from China. They make their way into North America and then are sold into the U.S. We have more than 100,000 American citizens dying every year. And so China, a very good start would be for them to make a gesture on the precursor fentanyls, because, distributing drugs in China is punishable by death. Why don't they apply the same standards to the people who are exporting these chemicals to the U.S.?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, that's because it's on purpose, right? Because they see it as a way to low-key wage war on the United States of America without having to actually wage war on the United States of America. And this is why the security border was such an important national security concern. And this is why I don't ever fall for the Democrats and their boohoo whining and crying about, oh, we're not letting in the poor illegals. Because ultimately an open border allows countries to, again, wage war on the United States. To actually kill Americans without actually having to invade, right? Because they could just invade at the southern border, right? They can send their people through our southern border, and they can smuggle drugs and things like that into the country, and that ends up killing folks, right? And that is exactly what China is doing right now. Now, in regards to the economic war, it certainly now has become an economic war of attrition, right? Who is going to blink first? Now, China, they suggest that they can wait it out, right? I mean, it seems as if they're making moves to provide support to their companies, right? You're seeing the 10-year Treasury yield spike, would suggest that somebody, a country, right, aka China, probably is selling U.S. dollars in order to try to keep their economy afloat, right? But they're certainly already feeling the pain, right? You're seeing them already make moves to try to stimulate their economy, to try to keep it afloat, to weather the storm. And I guess theoretically speaking, since President Trump only has 4 years and Xi Jinping has a lifetime, right? I mean, I guess China could wait it out, but it depends on how much pain are they willing to take. How much pain is the population willing to take without causing widespread chaos, right? That could possibly destabilize the Chinese government. Again, that is why you have Kevin O'Leary basically saying, no, we need to go to 400% tariffs, because we basically have to end it right now, right? It has to be ended soon, or else, again, if we end up having to wait it out, the longer that it plays out, the worse that is going to be for us, because ultimately, again, China knows that Trump only has 4 years, okay? And if this trade war doesn't play out in his favor, then it is likely that it would cost the Republicans the election. And if that's the case, then things are going to go back to business as usual, right? And they know that. So ultimately, in the day, this is why this trade war, again, it has to be quick, right? It has to be quick, and it has to be so damaging and so devastating that China doesn't have a choice when you talk about having to come to the table immediately, because they don't have the option of waiting it out, right? And that's essentially what has to happen. But what you're witnessing here, really, in the 21st century, is the disadvantages of so-called democracy, right? Because again, a place like China, because they don't have democracy, Xi Jinping doesn't have to worry about being voted out. Okay, he doesn't have to worry about an opposition party. He doesn't have to worry about the media essentially rooting for the enemy, right? Which all of these things are happening in the United States of America, right? And this is why I tell you that's why it's so bad, right? It's actually really bad that we have the media actively rooting for China, actively rooting for other countries, actively rooting against the United States of America, is because it weakens our position, right? It weakens our leverage when you have the media and the Democrats staging propaganda against the president of the United States while we're trying to conduct a trade war. It's one thing to disagree with the tariffs, right? To say, hey, you know what, I don't agree with the tariffs. But it's another that once the tariffs are implemented, for you to actively root against the president, because the more you actively root against the president, now you're just hurting us, right? The trade war is here, right? You can't stop it. It's already escalated. You might as well support the president, right? That's what you should do, because if you don't, again, you're weakening our leverage, and ultimately that results in us losing the war, and it is going to hurt the United States in the long run, okay? But again, like I said, they rather see America lose than for Trump to win, right? That is essentially what is happening. We have a lot of traitors in this country. The masks have come off, and at this point, these people, they should probably give up their citizenship and go move to another country, right? Because you should be ashamed to be an American if you're currently rooting against the president right now.
It's true, and that's where this all started. President Trump said that he was putting tariffs in place on China as a result of their failure to stop the fentanyl flow. But now people are wondering, is that still the reason to put tariffs on China? Is it to raise revenue? Is it to get supply chains into America? Is it to answer, the fentanyl problem? People, business leaders are saying to me, why are we doing this? Everyone was very excited about President Trump's agenda. Deregulation, tapping into energy, tax cuts, and now, boom, with these tariffs, everything has changed. Why are we doing this?
Well, Maria, I think it's, as you said in the last segment, it's all of the above. President Trump was elected with a mandate. He's closed the border, so check on that. We are doing the very large deportation of people, criminals, and people who have overstayed their visits, their period. So we're in the midst of that. And now President Trump is tackling the trade agenda. And this isn't done in isolation, Maria. As you just interviewed Senator Hagerty, we're running the parallel processes here. So there's tariff, there's tax.
Yeah.
Tax is going extremely well. That the Speaker Johnson, Leader Thune, from the leadership of people like Senator Hagerty, Jason Smith, Senator Crapo, I can tell you that that's going very well.
Yeah.
So at a point in the not too distant future, I think we will be back to firing on all cylinders. We have the response to the countries who want to come and sit at the table rather than escalate has been overwhelming.
Yeah.
Our allies, Japan, South Korea, India, and I will note that they are all around China. We have Vietnam coming today.
Yeah.
So everyone is coming to the table, and basically China's surrounded. The other thing
That's a
that
very
I
good point.
wouldn't.
Yeah, it is a very good point. It's an important point, and that's why people got to understand what this is about, right? This really is about just taking down China, right? That's what it's about, because they're getting too big, and those other countries as well too. South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, India, they also are threatened by China, okay, in their expansion, okay, and this is why they're some of the first countries to come to the table, because they understand the assignment, right? They understand it's actually in their best interest to rein in China, okay? So again, this is not just the United States. This is basically the world versus China, right? Or the U.S. allies, right? Our so-called allies versus China, right? That is what this really is about when it comes to reorganizing trade and making things a more level playing field with China, who, again, they don't play fair, right, at all. So we have to do what we got to do.
The other thing that I would note is that a Spanish official said today that maybe Europe should look to China instead of the U.S. And I can tell you that is a losing proposition for the Europeans, because what is going to happen, and we've already seen it starting last week, that as we put up the tariff wall, China's business model is predicated on this incredibly imbalanced economy and exporting low-cost goods and subsidized goods to the rest of the world. And guess where they are going to land? On the European shores. So our allies, part of our discussion as our allies come in and talk to us, is how do we get China to rebalance? That is the big win here.
Yeah.
That the U.S. is trying to rebalance toward more manufacturing. China needs to rebalance towards more consumption. If at a point we can move to that, then we can move together.
Yeah.
If they will acknowledge this fentanyl problem. So we have to have an end to these mercantilist policies. President Trump made that a priority.
That's right.
Just as tax is a priority.
Well, this is all really...
Yeah, so again, the Europeans, right? The Europeans are trying to play tough, and this is why I said that we should have colonized them a long time ago, right? Because they're more trouble than they're worth, right? When we need them to do what we're obviously trying to do, right? Which is to gang up on China, right? They want to play hardball, right? They want to pretend as if they got power. But of course, they don't hold the cards, right? Because ultimately, the U.S. cutting off China is just going to force more cheaper Chinese goods into Europe, which is not going to be good for domestic European businesses, right? Because now Europe is going to have to increase their tariffs on China in order to allow European businesses to continue to compete. Because China at this point, if they can't sell to America, and they got all these goods that they can't consume, then again, they're going to have to sell to somebody. And the Europeans logically would be their next best customer, which means that China is going to have to, again, sell their products at a much lower price in order to get rid of it. And that's going to hurt European businesses, right? The domestic businesses. So again, like I said, at this point, I'm very annoyed by Europe. Okay. And it seems at this point, Japan is more reliable when it comes to being an ally than the Europeans. And we definitely have to do something about the Europeans at some point because, again, they've gotten too big for their britches. I think at some point we may have to start positioning our military in ways that make the Europeans very uncomfortable because ultimately that may be what needs to happen in order for them to understand the severity of the situation and that we don't have time for their little games.
Important points, and I want to get to tax in a second. But in terms of the message, you just sent a great message to the Europeans. Let's hope they get it. In terms of the Chinese economy right now, you have to believe that 104% tariff on Chinese goods coming in is going to have a huge impact on the Chinese economy. How would you assess the Chinese economy right now?
Well, look, they were in a recession/depression due to a real estate collapse that had a real estate bubble that is deflating. That had been going on for years, and the economy was in terrible shape. So, again, they're going to go from bad to terrible. And that which is unsustainable will be unsustainable.
Yeah.
The other thing that the Chinese should not do is try to devalue their way out of this because, back to our European friends, our Japanese allies, our Korean allies, the Vietnamese, if China starts devaluing, then that is a tax on the rest of the world. And everyone will have to keep raising their tariffs to offset the devaluation.
Yeah.
So I would urge them not to do that and to come to the table.
So, I mean,
AKA Bassett is saying, try me, right? Again, this is the guy that broke the British pound, right? Along with Soros and Druckenmiller. But I'm just saying that you're playing with a guy, right? China's playing with a guy that understands currencies, right? He understands macroeconomics at a level that most people probably will never be able to grasp, right? So, I just don't think that China has the cards, right? Maybe they do. Maybe they can wait it out, right? Again, that could be their ultimate trump card, so to speak, is just to wait it out and say, you know what, we're cool. We'll just take the economic damage, right? We'll take the unrest. And I mean, they have an authoritarian dictatorship, so I guess theoretically they could just crack down on the unrest and just keep it moving, right? They got 1.4 billion people, so they got bodies they can sacrifice, right? So that could very well be what they choose to do. Which is why I think you're going to continue to see this ratchet up to the point where they're not going to have an option to wait it out. They're going to have to at least come to the table to make a deal. And hopefully that's what happens as a result. But we will see, right? We will see. I just would not bet against Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. I wouldn't bet against President Trump. But again, we will see what happens in this situation. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.